In October of 1984, a B-52 crashed on the south side of Monument Valley. The son of one of our engineer came running into my friend's apartment, and I was sitting in there, and he told us that I just saw a big explosion. I think a plane crashed, and we were all like, right.
Yeah, sure,
right.
He did.
Right. And then a little while later, somebody else came in and said, oh, what's going on up there? Oh, I saw a big explosion. And we're like, oh. And then Dave called us and said the police department said they want us on standby. What we knew was that there had been some kind of a plane crash, so we started heading up. We had flares with us and everything, and we just kept driving, and the police just kept waving us through. And then eventually we started going through these sand dunes. And, you know, I'm looking at my friend Dean and saying, are we going to Hunts Mesa? Because Hunts Mesa it's like a four-wheel drive trip that you take. It's an old mining road. Okay. And it goes to the south side of Monument Valley, and then you look down on Monument Valley. We're driving through the sand, and then there's this giant jet engine laying in the sand.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, you kind of look at each other and go, well, that's unusual.
Yeah.
The radar navigator had crushed legs. It was cold night, and it was kind of intermittently snowing, so they kind of started a fire next to each person. And then he was some kind of navigator, but not radar. He was laying in boulders, and he had some burns and then maybe a broken elbow or something like that. And then there was a guy in the car. I was standing by a guy for a long time who was standing by the guy that was burned. I thought he was a Navajo police officer because he was wearing a Navajo police jacket. Yeah. And then I looked down at his pants and realized he was one of the flight crew. And he was actually the pilot. Oh, wow. And he was, I know his neck was real stiff, but he was less injured than some of the others. So there were 3 people missing. They found one across, there was a valley and then another ridge. They found one there. He was unconscious but alive. They found one that had been killed by debris in his ejection. The guy said, okay, that's everybody. And we were like, you said there were 7. And he said, well, the 7th guy went down with the plane because he didn't have an ejection seat. Okay. He was an observer. The C-130's flying around us, and it's dropping flares, and the whole area would turn orange. You know, you're out in the high desert, you know, in the rocks and that. It was the most surreal evening. The rescue helicopter, which I would call a Huey, I don't know if it was, but came in from Kirtland. Dave and John and Dr. Reese were across the way with Doug Schwartz, who was the co-pilot, and they radioed me and said, go tell the helicopter they need to come over here. You know, the doctor was triaging and said, this guy needs to go out first. I scramble up through the rocks, and I've got like long blonde braids, and I guess I was in my 30s by then, but you know, I'm not very tall. And I go up to these big military guys and said, go over there. They said, go over there, you know, and they listened to me. Yeah. And I said, 2 of those guys are Vietnam veterans, and they're telling me you can land over there. And so they flew over there, and they picked up Doug, and then they came back, and then they loaded everybody else up, and then they flew off. And then it was like quiet, and the flares stopped, and you're in the dark, and you're like, what just happened?
Debbie Braff has been seen all over the place lately. We just enjoyed the annual Riverfest event, and Debbie was on the show to promote it. She also went on the mayor's table to promote it. And now she's back again. Why did I have her back so soon? It's because of something she said in passing during her last appearance on Ken's Think Tank. When I met Debbie, I had no idea that she used to be a firefighter. And I certainly had no idea that she was Arizona's very first female fire chief. What? Debbie grew up a Texas girl who moved to Kayenta, Arizona to be a school teacher. While there, she joined their local search and rescue team and finally joined the Kayenta Volunteer Fire Department. She did great, and when the fire chief left, she was elected as the new fire chief. She helped them get a brand new fire department and has some amazing firefighter stories. I'm going to stick her in the truck and have her tell us all about it. Want to see how it goes?
Come along for the ride in Ken's Think Tank.
Ken's Think Tank is made possible by the following sponsors. Do you need HVAC services or a tankless water heater? Four States Equipment. Whether it's residential or commercial, Four States Equipment has it all. Parts and equipment, sales and service, from restaurant equipment to heating and air conditioning. Visit fourstatesequipment.com. Ken Collins Marketing. It's simple. We help small business owners get more customers. Show our sponsors some love. If you're watching the video, show us some love by smashing the like button. And remember, the views and opinions expressed on Ken's Think Tank do not necessarily reflect those of our sponsors.
I just had you on the show.
You did. I feel like I have a publicist.
Yeah. So you were just on talking about Riverfest, which by the time this airs, while we're recording it, it's about to happen. By the time this airs, Riverfest will already have taken place over Memorial Day weekend. And that is a huge undertaking.
It is.
Yeah, that's a big event. So that event is one that has caught the attention of the state, and it's of importance to them in their outdoor recreation efforts and their tourism efforts, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, lots of work. So right now you're still in the stress of it, but by the time this airs and you get to watch this video and just be calm about it and not have to worry about it.
I might have a margarita as I listen.
2 months
now,
at least.
So.
Oh, but while I had you on the show, you mentioned a thing that just perked my attention. That you were Arizona's first fire chief, female fire chief.
Right.
Yeah. You're not from? Are you from Arizona?
No, I actually grew up in Dallas.
Oh, okay. And then somehow you ended up in Yuma. You were
No, not Yuma. Nope.
No.
I was in Kayenta.
Kayenta.
I was in Kayenta for
thinking it was
27 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you were a school teacher.
I was a school teacher.
Yeah. And is that what took you to Kayenta?
It is. When I finished I did my student teaching in Dallas.
Okay.
And I had first gone to Kayenta when I was, I think, just turning 13 on a family vacation. I don't know, something about it resonated with me.
Yeah.
And when I went to college at the University of California, Irvine, so every year was traveling back and forth from Dallas to Irvine and back, I would start looping up through Kayenta.
Yeah.
And I would take a Jeep trip every time I went because I love Jeep trips. I don't know, when I finished student teaching, it's actually the only place I applied. And I thought it might be, adventure for a couple years. And then like 3 decades later, I moved to Farmington.
Wow. So what was it that brought you to Farmington from there?
I needed to live closer to a Walmart.
Okay.
I got to an age where, that 135-mile drive each way on a weekend to come into town and get your hair cut or go to a movie or go to the mall, whatever. It was getting old. Yeah. And it was just time. I actually just woke up one morning in March of 1999, and it was like an epiphany, and said, it's time to move, time to go.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of weird.
No real big event or a job move or anything? It was just...
I actually came here without a job, which was the only reckless thing I've ever done in my life, but it worked out, so...
Now, did you start teaching when you got here to Farmington?
No, actually, the last 8 years I was in Kayenta, I was an elementary school principal.
Oh, okay.
And so the first year I was here, I was an assistant principal at Central Primary in Bloomfield. And the following year, I was hired as principal of Heights. So I was at Heights for 4 years when they asked if I would consider going to Apache, because it's the only majority Native American school in Farmington School District. And that was my background experience. Okay. So I moved to Apache until I retired.
So you're hanging out in Kayenta, you're just a young girl.
Yep.
And you're thinking, I've got some time on my hands. I'll join the fire department.
It wasn't quite like that. I actually, because I did go out there with a 4-wheel drive, I didn't get my Jeep yet, but I had a 1970 International Scout And one of the guys who had been driving the tours over the years, who knew me by then, said you should join the Navajo County Search and Rescue. So I did join the Navajo County Search and Rescue, and I will say we never once went on a search or a rescue.
Oh, wow.
Probably the second year I was there, which would have been maybe 74, 73, 74 or something, one of the teachers who I would describe as an uppity women's libber read a little newsletter thing from Pete Peterson, who owned Kayenta Motors, and he was the fire chief, saying that if there, we're always looking for volunteers, if there's any men who'd like to be on the volunteer fire department, to contact him. And so she decided she wanted to make a statement, but she didn't want to do it by herself. So she said, would you consider that? And I was like, sure, why not? I was 23 years old or something, and it was like, why not? And so I joined, and I can honestly say none of us had a clue what we were doing. And ironically, a couple years later, a hose, kind of an old hose, broke, and it flipped up and it hit her on the arm and bruised her arm.
Yeah.
And her husband made her quit.
Oh no.
But I stayed. And so, I remember the very first fire call that we got, because it was like a phone tree.
Yeah.
I stopped. I was already in bed, so I got dressed, put on earrings. It was just a force of habit, and I was like, okay, that was really kind of stupid. And then one of the first, so I think that was the first fire. It was they called up and they said there's a fire at Westras, and they're about to hang up. But I was like, where is Westras?
Where's that?
And they said it was at the highway department. It was a highway patrolman's house. It was a trailer. And it was kind of a stupid question too, because once I got out of where I lived, the entire hill was lit up, and it was like, oh, that must be the fire there with all the big flames.
Yeah.
And because he was highway patrolman, he had a shed full of ammunition. So we spent most of the fire like cowering behind the fire truck, although they were all in boxes, so nothing actually penetrated. But that was an adventure. And then we had a fire at the old hotel and lodge, had probably built in the 20s or 30s, and think it wasn't being used. Maybe there was a cafe there. And I just remember standing there, and they just poured water in there until pretty much it was coming out windows. Yeah. Because nobody really knew much about fire science. There is a science to it. And there was a young man who was working, I think, as a mechanic at one of the gas stations, who I believe lives in Kirtland to this day, and his name is Daryl Boss. And Daryl, if you're out there or anybody is, tell him hi. And he was a couple years older than me, and he had fire training, and he began training us. He began teaching us fog or hose nozzle patterns, and things like that. And so one night there was a fire up on what they call the hill. I'd call it a bootlegger house. Nobody was living in it. It was like a little 10 by 10 house probably.
Right.
And flames just blasting out the window. And I had, because Daryl had taught us, I had geared up, and he saw that I had geared up because a lot of people hadn't. And so he got behind me. He's a good foot taller than I am. He was a big guy.
Yeah.
And he got behind me and he started teaching me. And he was saying, okay, go ahead and, keep walking. And we're walking closer, and this fire is just flaming out this window.
Yeah.
And he'd keep walking, and I'm like this at this point. And, he said, he had me open the nozzle and then put it on a fog pattern.
Yeah.
And we continued to walk up. Once you have a fog pattern, you're kind of protected. And then you put the hose inside the window and did like 3 counterclockwise sweeps, and the fire went out like that.
Wow.
And I was like, holy crap.
We don't have to turn them into swimming pools?
We don't have to just fill it. Yes, exactly. And that was like oh my gosh, I cannot believe this is exciting.
What was the science behind it? Was it basically just reducing the amount of oxygen in there, replacing it with water?
Yes.
With a fog pattern?
The fog pattern is, it's doing 2 things. It's reducing the oxygen. It's also lowering the temperature as it vaporizes. But I think it's mostly the air thing.
Yeah.
So I always liked school, and I always liked learning.
Oh, yeah.
So I just sort of soaked it up.
Yeah.
And Arizona had a state fire school every September, and we started, because of Daryl's encouragement of training in that, we started going down to the state fire school to learn those kinds of things. You need to understand building construction. so that you
Right.
understand how a building collapses,
yeah.
and where it'll collapse. And there's just a jillion things that I can think of that you need to know. And I think back to those early days before Daryl really began training us. That basically when we would have a training session, it would amount to everybody sitting there and looking at the fire truck, which was a 1959 Seagraves, and trying to figure out how to work it. And I think it was the lady, the uppity women's liber, I think, because she was one of those that was a very tedious thinker.
Sure.
She had written out these long directions, which were in plastic on the side. So it's, you go to fire. Part 1, you do this, and,
Right.
whatever. And, eventually you learn, basically, you have water comes in from a hydrant, because this didn't have a tank
Right.
to it, Water comes in from a hydrant, you open the valve to that, it goes into the truck, and then it has to go out the discharge, and you have a valve for that. And, once you kind of understand that,
Right.
you can pretty much look at any fire truck and have a general idea
Okay.
of how it's going to work. And then there's other things you need to learn, like the size of lines and why you would use them, and the types of nozzles and when you would use them, and,
Right.
and so on. And whether it's safe to go inside a building or whether you need to fight from the outside.
Right.
It's called offensive or defensive.
Okay.
And so there's just a lot to learn. We started inviting the trainers from the State Fire School to come up to Kayenta to do like regional trainings.
Okay.
And we were notoriously famous because we entertained them while they were there, because otherwise they're going to sit in a motel room with
Right.
the 2.5 channels that we had back in those days.
Right.
And so we would take them out to Monument Valley or various other places and do a steak cookout and drink a little beer. And they were dying to come to Kayenta. They fought over the assignments. Hey, can we do the next training? And so got to know those guys really well. And they were because by this time Daryl had left Kayenta, I think, moved back over here. They took up in that position of training us.
Yeah.
And teaching us how to do things. And thanks to all the training we got really good at what we were doing, and
Yeah.
we learned how to to gear up. We weren't wearing protective gear originally.
Right.
You just went out there in your coat and pants and
Sure.
and filled the building full of water.
Right.
And so we had protective gear. We had air packs. We started doing things the way they were supposed to be done.
Right.
And for safety, etc. And eventually we're able to get, now Kayenta, the fire department was actually a non-profit, and people
Okay.
paid for fire protection, and mostly, thank God, for some of the businesses and the school district,
Right.
which pretty much paid the bulk of the expenses. Nowadays, Kayenta's fire department is part of, well, I think it's kind of part of their township, but it's also part of the Navajo Division of Public Safety.
Okay.
So they have beautiful equipment I only fantasized about back in those days. But after we had our 59 Seagraves, and then we got an Air Force crash truck.
Yeah.
That thing was horrible. It was a dinosaur. I mean, it was literally like a dinosaur to drive, but at least it was a second fire truck. And then we had a pickup truck, which was a quote-unquote quick attack that had a pump mounted on the back.
Oh, okay.
So that you could, like for car fires or
Right.
brush fires or things like that, you could get to, because the other two trucks didn't really have water tanks.
Right.
Eventually, we were able to buy a used fire truck in San Diego. We were in kind of like a lean-to add-on to a school district warehouse. It had a dirt floor. And I remember one time when we were getting the truck out for training and opening one of the compartments, and there was a mouse nest there with little mice in it.
Yeah.
And you just want to cry, because you're like, this is sad. So in 1984, I think it was, I came across a community development block grant and wrote the grant for a fire station.
Okay.
And fortunately, we had a real go-getter, a council delegate at the time, and he and I worked together, and he did the pushing and I did the writing.
Yeah.
And we were able to get a fire station which was dedicated in the spring of maybe 1986. And in the interim, so in 1985, our fire chief, Dave Wanika, moved to Kirtland. It was at that point that I took over as chief. And we had sent out a publicity thing to various, I think nowadays we'd call them stakeholders, but to various entities about Dave's leaving in the years that he spent with the fire department and some of the achievements during his tenure and whatever. One of those was sent to the Daily Times because we had actually had some Farmington firefighters go do training in Kayenta, a couple of the state fire school things that we had. And also because Dave was going to be in Kirtland, I wanted the Valley Fire District to know that. Tori Adams was a reporter for the Daily Times, and I guess she called up the state fire marshal first, and then she called me up and asked me some questions, and then she did an article, and that's where I learned that I was Arizona's first female fire chief, because I hadn't really thought about it one way or the other. But when we went to fire school that September, the state fire marshal, who was a very good friend of mine anyway, was doing the opening speech at the fire school. It's like 700 fire people there. I had a horrible sinus infection, allergy-wise, September. Yeah. And I just remember, kind of being inside my own head. And one of my captains elbowed me and said, "He's talking about you." And I was like, oh. And so he introduced me as Arizona's first female fire chief. So I was like famous when we walked into bars during that fire school. People would turn and point, hey, what's that lady fire chief?
Nice.
But it wasn't, it was never an issue in Kayenta. We all...
You'd all been working together.
Yeah,
you all know each other.
When, firemen talk about the brotherhood, and, you really do, without it being dramatic, you really do rely on each other for safety and for your life.
Absolutely.
And so, we had established trust with each other.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah, and so then after a couple years of being fire chief, they invited me to be on the Arizona State Fire Training Committee, and that's the group that put together the fire school, and I was thrilled about that. Yeah. And then in '91, I left the fire department. I like to build things, and I don't like to maintain them. Yeah. And I felt like all the goals that I had set for the fire department, I had kind of reached, and I didn't really... Yeah. I felt kind of drifty, and I thought they need to move on. I let them know like 6 months ahead of time that at the end of the year, '91, I would be stepping down so that they could, come up with new officers and so on. And they did, and it kind of worked out because in the summer of '91 I got a job as principal. There's no way I could have done both. Right. Absolutely no way.
Now, how long was it from the time that you started there until the time you became chief?
11 years. Okay. I think.
Is that a reasonable time frame, or does it normally take somebody? It kind of depends on maybe where you are, right?
Yeah, probably. I have no clue. I didn't have ambitions to be.
Just kind of happened.
Much of anything, yeah, yeah. It always just kind of happens for me. I loved working with Dave. Dave and I we were great partners. We worked very well together. Yeah. And if he had stayed there, I would have been more than happy to continue to be his assistant. Right. And but when he left, it was like, okay, well, I guess it's my turn now. Yeah, it's I always want to say, it's another long ago in a galaxy far, far away. You know, it was in another lifetime. I was a firefighter.
That's what I say. I've lived a few different lives, and that was like one of your lives where you were a firefighter and a fire chief and all that. And well, that's amazing, man. I mean, you're just really cool. I mean, you're just this cool, like all the elements, right? You're smart, you're really personable, you're direct, you just all this stuff. And as you start piecing the pieces to your story together, it all starts to make sense. Like, oh, well, that's why. I mean, you're just this mostly fearless person that just, this is what's got to be done. Let's do this. And and get it done.
Oh,
So
you're
yeah.
embarrassing me. Yeah, you just, when I was principal at Heights, the kids would say, God, you're cool, Miss Braff. And I was like, I was a science nerd. I'm not cool, Miss Braff. But
I've never been cool.
I've never been cool. So for you to sit there and go, oh, yes, I'm just whatever. Anyway.
No, somewhere along the line, you became cool.
Oh, okay. I guess it all depends on your audience.
Yeah. Oh man, well this was fun. Thank you for riding with me
You bet.
again.
Yes. Please don't call for a while.
Yeah, give me a break.
Yeah, really. Well, give my fans a break. It's like, oh, jeez.
Ken's Think Tank is made possible with help from these fine sponsors: Basin Home Health and Hospice,